Welcome to a Little Box of Crochet technique video. Today we're going to be talking about filet crochet. We're making this video to support our June 2018 box, which is a beautiful shawl designed by Eleonora from Coastal Crochet, which is made using filet crochet. It's a very straightforward technique. It uses a combination of treble stitches, and that's UK terms, and chains in combination to create two components, a space which forms the open work around the edge of this little piece here, and a block, and the central border is made up of blocks. So there's just two components to do with filet crochet, and you can make an enormous range of designs using it. It's probably a good time to have a little talk about charts. With filet crochet, it's not too scary because they are really grids. Now I know this is a very simple design, but all filet crochet charts will work in a similar way, which is to say there'll be squares and the shaded in area will represent the blocks and the open areas represent the spaces. So you know, regardless of how complicated your design is, it's always going to follow that kind of format. Now, if you are familiar with using charts for things like cross stitch or tapestry or colour work in knitting or tapestry crochet, you are going to be used to using the kind of one square equals one stitch kind of way of thinking, but that's not the case with filet crochet. With filet crochet, each square represents either a space or a block. So again, if you just look at our sample piece, it's fairly, you know, you can see it's quite straightforward. We've got the spaces along the edge, which you can see in these kind of lovely open work trellis area, and we've got the blocks forming a border around this sort of four spaces in the middle. So really isn't too difficult to do at all. I'll just show you where to position the blocks and the spaces. So for example, you can see that we've started off with two rows of spaces here, so we'll have a look at how they kind of form, and then have a look at how you can move make a block above a space. So this row here is putting blocks above spaces, and then we'll have a look at putting spaces above blocks. And once you've got those very simple techniques off, you can run riot and make any number of filet crochet items. I'm ready to start my design, and I've just started with a chain of 29, which is what my pattern says I need to use. And I am going to, this is because it is the beginning, and obviously the beginning is often quite unusual. To start with, we need to make our first space. Spaces are normally made up with one treble, two chain, and then one treble. So we've got a starting treble to begin our row, two chain and one treble. But because we're right at the bottom and we've only got chains here, a lot of this is going to be made up with chains. So we're going to actually make a treble in the 8th chain from the hook, and I'm just going to do that and then I'll explain why we've done it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's in here. Okay, so what that has given us, if I actually can complete it, what that has given us, if I just take my hook out for a minute, it's a bit difficult to see just at the moment, but it will give us a square. So those chains have counted as our first treble, two chains, and then we've got our second treble in there. Okay, so that's a little bit unusual because it is from forming our, you know, it's from our starting chain. So we'll work on through. So we've made our first space. Okay, so our second space and subsequent spaces are going to be made by making two chain, 1, 2, and then we're going to make a treble, but we're going to miss two chain on our starting chain. Okay, so I'm going to miss 1 and 2, 1 and 2, and make it in the third one along. Okay, and I'm just going to go along and do that all the way along. So two chain, 1, 2, miss two chain and make a treble in the third, and I'll make it all the way along and we'll meet at the end. Okay, and I'm now going to make the last treble, and it will fall into the last chain, or it's basically the first chain we made, but the last available chain. It's easier said than done. There we go. Okay, so if I take this out now and just you can see it's a little bit sort of bendy, but don't worry, it will straighten up as we go. But you can see we've made a row of spaces, which kind of correlates to our pattern. Okay, so we're now going to turn our work and we're going to start looking at row 2, and we've got another row of spaces. So if we turn our work, we've got to make those boxes go all the way along again. So we're going to chain 3, and that's going to count as our first treble, and that's our starting treble. And our spaces are again formed by making 2 chain, 1, 2, and then a treble. Now this time we are going, because we're coming back, we've got a row underneath and we are making a space on top of the space. The trebles are always going to sit into the top of the treble from the row below, and it's intuitive where it goes. You don't really need to count or anything like that, you know, it's glaringly obvious where that treble is. So we'll go and put a treble in the top there and start forming this kind of lovely building block type situation. Let's do one more. So 2 chain and 1 treble to form our space. So 2 chain, and again we're putting it in the top of the next treble along without having to think about that too much. It's lovely, it's very intuitive working in filet crochet. You'll find this, that it's intuitive and enjoyable. So let me do just one more and I can put this down and you can see how our how this structure is forming. My pattern's dancing about. But if you look at that, you can see it's a really nice, you know, building that design nicely. So I'm going to finish this row, and then on our next row you can see we've got some blocks to do, and that's just slightly different. So I'll finish this row and we'll carry on. Okay, I'm at the end of the row, and because obviously at the beginning of the last row we were just working with chains, we didn't have a proper treble to begin that row with. So we've got to form our last treble for the last kind of supporting arm, if you like, of our space, and I'm just going to make that into the 3rd chain from this loop going up here. So 1, 2 and 3, it's going to go in there. And you will hopefully see a nice little, whoops, block, a little block of 2 rows of spaces, which is looking remarkably like our pattern, which is really great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work along row 3 from right to left, and we've got 2 spaces and then we start on blocks. So let's turn our work. Now blocks and spaces, that we've always got to take into consideration a starting treble. Okay, so our starting treble here is actually going to be 3 chain because we're at the beginning of a row. So our starting treble is there, and we're doing a space, and spaces are always made up with 2 chains and a treble. So let's do that. 1, 2 chain and treble, and we know where our treble goes. It goes into the top of the treble underneath it, because it's a very sort of, it's a block pattern, so there's no staggered effect or anything like that at the moment. So there is our first space. So our second space made up again with 2 chain and 1 treble. Let's do that now. 2 chain and 1 treble. Now looking at our pattern, we now start with our blocks. Okay, and we have got 4 blocks in a row. Now as I mentioned with the space, we always have to start with like a leading treble, and our leading treble for these blocks we always have to start with a leading treble with the spaces, and the same goes for the blocks as well. And our leading treble is already in place, it's sat there because we've just made it from, you know, the last space. And blocks are made out of 3 trebles. Now we are going to be working over spaces, so I just wanted to show you the placement of the trebles that form a block when you're working over the top of a space. Okay, So we've got our leading treble in place there, and we're now going to do 3 trebles to make a block. When we're working over a space, the first 2 trebles actually go into the space. So our hook goes in there. Okay, it's not working into a chain or anything like that, it's just going into that space. So we're going to do 2 in there. 1. Oh, dropped it, sorry. And 2 in the space. And our 3rd treble, which forms the block, is going to go just as before into that supporting treble from underneath. So it's just building on the top of it. So the last one of the block goes in there. Okay, so that's block number 1 done. So that is, that block is complete. And it is there. So we've got 3 more blocks to do. As mentioned, each block is made up of 3 stitches, so we'll go ahead and do those again. So when you're working above a space, when you're working a block above a space, the first 2 trebles go into the space. That's 1, that's 2. And the last one goes into the supporting treble from underneath. Okay, so that is our 2nd block complete. I've got 2 more, so I'm going to quickly do them. Okay, I have now completed all 4 blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4, for this row of our pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're now going to go back to making spaces on top of spaces. Now, you've already done that, but it's really, you know, we'll just do that quick transition from blocks to spaces. It's super easy. Spaces are made up of 2 chain and 1 treble, as you know. So here we go 1, 2, and you know where the treble goes. It goes in the supporting treble from the one below. So I'm going to finish this row and we will be ready to move on. Okay, we're on row 4, and you can see that row 4 has 4 blocks sitting on top of the previous 4 blocks. So how do we work that? Well, it is as straightforward as you would imagine. You're just going to pop a treble on the top of every treble from the row below. So it's still 3 trebles to make up a block, so let's do that together. So that's 1 in the first, in top of the first one from the block below, 2 in the top of the second one from the row below, and the 3rd one is always kind of that supporting strut. Let's call it a strut. It's kind of architectural, isn't it? So the supporting strut is going all the way up, and our closing treble of the block goes right on top of it. Okay, and that is very straightforward when you're working blocks on top of blocks. Let's do another one. So the first treble of the block goes on top of the first treble of the block below, 2nd into the 2nd, and the 3rd into that supporting one that's going all the way up. Let me move that out of the way so you can see that. So you see that supporting one is going all the way up, and your 3rd and final treble of the block goes in there. So that is working blocks on top of blocks. Simple, nothing to worry about. And I'll finish this row, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get us to the point where we're going to work spaces on top of blocks, because that's the other thing you'll encounter. Right, okay, so we're up here on row 5, and I've made 2 spaces, as you can see at the beginning of the row. We've got 2 spaces here, 1 and 2, and we're now going to move on to doing 1 block and then 2 spaces again. And I wanted to do this row because I wanted to show you spaces on top of blocks. That's the only other kind of combination of things that you haven't done yet. So we're going to go straight into making 1 block, and we know that that is straightforward. It's just 3 trebles into the top of the trebles below. As you work this, you will see that it is very blocky, very structural, and it's very intuitive actually where your hook has to go for each stitch. It's sort of straight up and down, straight lines. There's no sort of wavering, missing, you know, slants or anything like that. So you can see it's very straight up and down. So here we go. We're going to work spaces over blocks. Now, just a quick word on this. If you are following a pattern which is written rather than charted, you may now be told to work 2 spaces. And how we're going to work at 1 space is by doing 2 chain and 1 treble. So if you were working 2 spaces, you'd work 2 chain, 1 treble, 2 chain, 1 treble. Absolutely fine. Only thing is where do we put that treble? So let's just show you. So I've made my 2 chain, 1 and 2, and the treble, all you're going to do is continue up. If I just sort of show you here, we're going to continue up that sort of structural block, going all the way up here, and as if by magic, if I show you this sort of close to, you're just going to miss out 1 and 2 treble, and you're going to put that final treble of the space into the 3rd one along. And again, once you've done that, you will see that it's intuitive, it's blocky and structural, and not too much of a surprise really. So there we go, we've done 2 chain and 1 treble, and we've formed a space. Let's do a 2nd space, 2 chain, 1, 2, and the treble goes in the 3rd one along. So miss 1 treble, miss 2 treble, 3rd treble there. Let's have a look. So 1, 2 and 3, and we have now made 2 spaces. Okay, I'm going to do the block here to finish this kind of little section, and that is 3 treble. So if you are now told to make 1 block, that will be making 3 treble. So here we go. 1, 2 and 3. So you know, if you're working from a chart, it's fairly straightforward. If you're working from written instructions, and our June box has both, if you're told to make, you would be told to make 2 spaces, 1 block, 2 spaces, 1 block, and then 2 spaces on the end. So you've got your chart version, your written version. I'm also going to just quickly get a schematic to show you what the stitches would look like, you know, just the traditional crochet stitch diagram, to show you how a space on top of a block on top of a space, and then a space on top of a block would look, so you can kind of visualize it that way as well. So that is filet crochet. That's all there is to it. These 2 components, the spaces and the blocks. So if you get yourself some squared paper, and you can get your designs going, get your practice going, and enjoy filet crochet.